Hi, I'm Hillary Hess. You're listening to A Helping of Happiness. This podcast is for busy moms like me who have a full life and are constantly finding themselves in a balancing act. I definitely do not have it all together, but I hope that sharing the things that I have learned as a mom of 7 kids and the things that you will hear from the guests that I have on will be things that will really inspire and help us all to be a little bit better and give us all some fresh ideas and have a little bit of fun while we're at it. Hey, welcome to Helping of Happiness, episode number 91. We have returning guest today, Niki Olsen. Niki is a licensed clinical mental health counselor from Utah, and she uses mind-body bridging in her practice. She's going to teach us today all about how to better parent kids when your children have ADHD. Now, this is not, most of this we're definitely talking about ADHD and how you can use these different tools and skills when you have children with this condition, with this diagnosis, or you think maybe they had this diagnosis, but this really relates to all kids and even all adults. A lot of the things that she's saying is so useful to all people. So I hope that you'll really keep that in mind as you're listening if you don't have a family member with ADHD or even yourself. The other thing also, we have a really special thing coming up with Niki. She's going to come on our social media and do a live event with us this week. So you're going to have a chance to ask some questions to Niki and she will answer them. So if you have some questions now that you want to, please give us a message. You can email me at hill, Hill, at helpingofhappiness.com. Or you can message us on any of our social network platforms. We're Helping of Happiness all across social media. So take advantage of that. Niki is such a wealth of information. We're so happy to have her on. We loved having her on when she was on episode number 78 with us, when she taught us all about how she receives personal revelation. So I just love Niki so much and feel so blessed to have her back with us today. So without any further ado, here's Niki. Hey, Niki, how are you?
Doing awesome.
It is so great to have you back on here. We loved having you on our last podcast when we talked all about personal revelation. And I'm so thrilled that we can talk to you now about ADHD a little bit.
Yes, I'm excited.
So just give us a quick little blip about you, just who you are and what you do real quick. And because we can always have our listeners go back and listen to the other podcast where we gave a little more lengthy bio for you.
Perfect. So I'm a licensed clinical mental health counselor, and I'm licensed in the state of Utah, live in a little town called Blanding. And I primarily work with patients through a modality called mind-body bridging. And I do online consultations now and work with people individually through groups and through digital courses, teaching those same skills, mind-body bridging skills now.
Love it. And I love all that I've learned from you so far. I can't wait to talk about this now. So let's talk a little bit. I know ADHD is a topic that we could go on for hours and hours and hours, right?
Right.
But I just would love some hard and fast tips and tricks for, be related to kids or marriage or, just wherever we can kind of throw this.
Yeah.
I don't know, like we need some mental health help today.
Yes. I want to talk a little bit about what ADHD is first. I think if people could kind of understand that, because I think people think ADHD is just when kids don't listen, right?
Or when they're hyper. Like that's what I used to always think. He's like, oh, they're hyper. So my kid isn't hyper, so I don't think he has it. But I think it manifests in very different ways now that I'm learning a little more about it. So tell me a little bit more about what it is. And
there's two different types of ADHD that they've categorized now. They used to just call it ADHD, and now they call it ADHD, and you can be inattentive type, where you just can't focus and it's hard to focus, and there's lots of categories in the DSM for that. But then there's the hyperactive type, where people often think of like where they're just not sitting still and they're fidgety and maybe not listening. And people can have a predominant type of one of those, or they can have a combined type. They can have both of those. So ADHD it affects the neurotransmitters in your brain, specifically to the executive functioning part of your brain. So executive functioning helps us like problem solve, time management, organization, communication, empathy. That's our functioning part of our brain, right? So with people who have ADHD, those neurotransmitters like that, I think of neurotransmitters as highways, right? They're the highways of our brain, and they're just not firing in the way we want to, right? And so it, with ADHD, I want to make you can have ADHD in childhood and adulthood, but people who are adults with ADHD don't get it as adults. You have to have had it as a child. It could have went undiagnosed, and you could just get diagnosed as an adult, but you had to have had signs and symptoms
it's
when
not
you
like
were
there's
younger.
an adult onset of
There is not.
Yeah.
There is not. Yep, there is not. And it's not like so ADHD is part of the brain, so it's not like, you know, something happened to you and you have ADHD. So a lot of symptoms of ADHD are also manifested for people if they've experienced trauma. So I see a lot of people that come in and say they have symptoms of ADHD, they think it's ADHD. And when I dig into their kind of background, I realize you just had a traumatic experience or experiences or life, and it's manifesting itself as ADHD. And so there's the medication could still be helpful for you for ADHD, but the way in which we go about treating it can be a little bit different, because trauma, we want to do healing work and trauma focused work, not necessarily just skills for focus or hyperactivity. And so I want your listeners to be aware of, you know, it might be trauma that could be causing ADHD symptoms as well.
That is really good to know.
Yeah. So, and getting good trauma work and healing and care can alleviate those symptoms of ADHD that you think are ADHD, right? Those symptoms that you're having. So, but the other part of that, so back to like the executive functioning part of your brain, those highways we want to strengthen. So mind-body bridging is a technique or tool that helps activate that part of the brain. So it does lots of other things, but the premise behind it is that we all have a system inside of us that when it turns on can disconnect our mind and body from communicating to each other. Just feels like they're speaking different languages, right? And that's kind of how someone with ADHD might describe it, is like, my brain's telling me one thing and my body is telling me to do another, right? It just feels like we're going in different directions. So the tools that I teach you how to bridge your mind and body back together, open those highways back up to your executive functioning part of your brain, and strengthen those, okay? So they're innate in us who don't have ADHD. Those highways are just there. And once we reconnect, we're fine. People with ADHD, they're kind of having a dual effect when that system turns on. One, they're having a hard time with those highways to the executive functioning part of the brain before that system turns on. Then that system turns on and it just intensifies it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so by teaching them to rest that system and bridge their mind and body back together, then they're better able to start working on some of those skills for ADHD. So as far as treatment's concerned with ADHD, we have two forms of treatment. You can have medication, right? And the medication helps with the symptoms. But there's no cure for ADHD. It's not like you take the medication like for depression and you can kind of get through a low period and maybe be able to wean yourself off. That's not how it works. So the thing with ADHD is you can learn skills and tools to deal with the symptoms so that you can function without medication or with a decrease of medication, or medications that can be taken as needed. So it's important that even if you're medicating your child for ADHD, that you're teaching them skills of how to deal with this. Because if you're not, then they're going to be reliant on the medication. And there's just so many side effects with ADHD medication. Like, I'm not like saying don't do it. I'm just saying, you know, it can stunt their growth and their appetite and, you know, cause sleep problems and all of this. Like, it's
and it makes them not want to take it too, right? So another thing too is it's like, okay, either they have the medication and they're good, or they don't and they're a mess. So it's
So if we can arm them with some tools and tactics in some of these areas that we'll talk about that are really kind of hard hitting with kids, right? School's hard, homework when you come home, and nighttime are just really hard when you have ADHD. And so we need to fortify them with some tools in regards to that. So we'll kind of talk about some of those
Love
tools.
this. Okay. I'm like, feed me, just tell me all the things.
Yes.
I have one of my kids, I feel like is definitely, he's never been diagnosed, but it's like he has all the symptoms, and these are our hot spots. And I've talked to friends that have kids that have also, and heard their kids have been more diagnosed, and these are their same. It's like, man, these are the hardest parts. It's the school, it's the homework, and it's the bedtime, because they just cannot wind down.
Yeah.
So,
and these tools, like, are those not the hardest times with kids in general, right? Like, all these tools that I give you don't have to be just for ADHD. Like, they can be helpful for anything. So if you're like, well, my kid does that, it doesn't mean they have ADHD. It means they're a child, and they are doing that because they are a human. So it's fine that we can use some of these tactics and tools.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I meant to say that, and so I'm glad that you did, so that I
yes. We're not saying that if your kid is doing these things that they have ADHD. They're just human children who can do these things as well. And I want to say that ADHD will manifest itself across different situations. So if your kid only has problems focusing at school but is totally fine at home or in peer groups, they probably don't have ADHD. Something else is going on. So ADHD manifests itself in other areas. So usually they'll have a teacher take a quiz, they'll have the kid take a quiz, and they'll have a parent take a quiz so they can see those different situations and see how that manifests itself in those areas. So,
okay, great. Okay.
Well, should we talk about
start with the classroom? Yes, because for me, I think that that's the hardest as a parent, because I'm not there to say, okay, let's do these different tips and tricks. Like, that's something that they have to have in their tool belt to use on their own, because I can't be. I'm always telling my teenager, I'm like, come on, I can't go with you to high school and
you want me to
sit with you and hear what your teacher has for your assignments today. I can't turn in your assignment that you forgot to turn in, or whatever,
Well, and you can't be in charge of the teachers. Like, you can't be telling the teachers, you have to do this for my kid.
Exactly.
You can if they have a 40 whatever plan, or an IEP. I don't know. They call it different things in different states. But if they have a plan, the teachers are required by law to do those things. But that takes a lot of work to get those into effect. And certainly if your kid needs those, you want to put that into place to help them. But it's not always possible and effective and all of that. So we want to be arming our kids with tools that they can do on their own, even if no other adult at school helps them. So these are going to be practical
not that far on the spectrum. You want to be able to make sure they're as functional as possible, especially for the future. This is what I'm worried about. Like, how are we going to keep a job? How are we going to go to college? I think it's because my oldest is going to college, so it's like everything's spinning really fast. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is coming really, really fast now that I'm seeing how quick the kids are gone. So we got to get this all fixed right now. So,
Well, and you bring up a good point that maybe we can do. I was going to talk about with the homework section, but I think working with kids who have the ADHD can bring up your own emotional things, right? It can be very difficult. It can create that mind clutter you're talking about. It can create a lot of tension in our bodies that can manifest itself and keep us from functioning the way we want to as parents, right? Like, we start dreading these times that are really difficult, and our mental health suffers. So I think these tools that
you're rubbing off on me.
The kids. But these tools, these mind-body bridging tools, I teach them to parents who have kids with ADHD so that they can function at their top level and be present with their kids and be able to teach them these tools. You can't teach your kids these tools if your mind and body are disconnected. If that system is awake for you, you are not teaching at your optimal level. They're not going to understand you because your executive function brain, where you communicate and have empathy from, is shut off too, right? Like, you're now feeling the exact same way they feel. So I would recommend for parents who are struggling emotionally themselves to maybe do my digital course, where they just learn the basic skills so that they can apply them to themselves, so that they can learn mind-body bridging tools to apply to themselves and be able to kind of have that relief, open up their executive functioning part of their brain and be able to function at top level for their kids. But so for the school, these are tools that kids can do themselves. So one of the things that helps reconnect that mind and body, open up that executive functioning part of their brain, is your five senses. Okay. And I've done a free download on my website for you guys to create a little plan with your kids to teach them how to use their senses. So it's just at nbbnikki.com/free, and you'll be able to download that. And Hillary will link it for you too, so you can download that. And so our five senses are what reconnect our mind and body and open up that executive functioning part of our brain. And it's not just about like thinking about your senses, it's actually noticing them. Okay. So this is what we're going to want to teach our kids to do. So the little plan walks them through, like, what are three things I can look for? Okay. So then they can write that down. You can have a plan for school. You can have a plan for home. You can have a plan for nighttime. So you can print out three of these if you want. You can have them think about, what would I look for at school? I would look for the textures in the carpet. I would look for the colors on the wall. I would look at the shapes on my desk. And so they're just looking for these senses. Or what are three sounds I can hear? I can hear the feet, everybody's feet moving around. I can hear the pencils writing on the paper. I can hear the teacher talking. So they're recognizing, becoming aware of these senses. Or what can I feel? I can feel the desk with my hands. I can feel the textures in my shirt. I can feel gravity on my body. I can feel my feet on the floor. So they're writing these things down. They literally have that plan. They can put it in their desk or wherever it is, right? Let's see, what did we do? Sight, sounds, feeling, taste. So they're not going to be able to like pop in some gum or something, you know, like, what can I eat right now?
No gum.
Yeah. So taste, I like to think of, like, if you were to think of a lemon and you said, what would that taste like? Your mouth, doesn't it do something if you're like, right?
Like,
yes, it's activating your senses. Yeah. So you think of foods that they could think about and they could taste them in their mouth. Okay. Also, let's see, what did we miss? Smell. So I like to, what smells are happening around me, but not only smells, but noticing the air, how it feels in my nose when it goes in and how it comes out, just becoming aware of the air and how that feels as I'm smelling, if that makes sense. So
yes,
literally arming them.
You did a similar exercise to this when you were on the Family Looking Up podcast in your stress episode, right? Where you through, because I was doing that with you, because when I got out my piece of paper and writing down all the things that I was feeling, and it's surprisingly how much it really does help. Just
right?
Yeah.
That's because it opens up those networks. It's reconnecting your mind and your body, opening up those networks to your executive functioning brain, which houses all of that great functioning ability, right?
Yeah.
And you just feel like you can handle life, right? And you feel like you can absorb the things that are happening around you. So you can imagine if it helped you, how much that would help our kids. But you have to practice these tools with them. So you have to write the plan out. You have to have them practice their senses. Because if they're not practicing them and using these tools, when they go to do them, they're not going to be very good at them. Right. They're not going to remember to use them. So it's something that we really have.
Not going to remember to use them for
sure.
They
won't. I don't. I'm a human. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to remember something that I don't practice. So we have to practice this.
Would you when would you have them do this? Would you do this when they're going to a class that they're stressed about? Would you do it at the beginning of the school day, just as they're sitting there? Like, when during the day would you have them do this?
So there's techniques about recognizing when the system is awake. Okay. So you want to use these senses, when that system's awake. You want to practice it when that system's not awake, though. Okay. So it really doesn't matter when they're doing it throughout the day. If that system's not awake, practice, right? If that system's awake, use it. So really, you're kind of using your senses throughout the day. What I recommend to adults, and this works for kids too, is just find activities that you're doing every day and incorporate your senses. So every time you're walking down the hallway, notice the ground underneath your feet. Every time you're at your locker, notice how things feel, everything that you're touching. Every time you sit in your desk, just notice the seat underneath you. Just kind of having them recognize their senses everywhere they're going. So whether it's happening or not, they are using their senses. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. So I kind of did this when I was cooking dinner the other night, because I was listening to one of your episodes when I was doing it, and I was rolls, and I never realized how much I loved the feel of the dough when I was rolling.
Yes.
I'm like, this is such a much more exciting experience rolling out these rolls with this dough,
Yes.
and it happened to be a really good batch, so it wasn't too sticky. It was just right.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yep.
This is
So the
really
senses with that.
an experience that I would just normally rush through, but I
Yeah.
actually enjoyed it more just by feeling more with my hands. And I thought that was so
Right?
cool.
It does open up enjoyment, right? And so
Yeah.
you can imagine if our kids are just really struggling and they're just dreading going to a class because a teacher is going to be harping on them because they're not going to be able to understand, that they can open up there and access that ability to just feel like, okay, I got this, I can do this, or enjoyment. That's what it does for us. It just provides relief.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah, so
Okay.
simple, but so helpful, right?
I know. Well, and not
Yeah,
something you would think that would have anything to do with connecting you to your schoolwork. You know what I
yeah,
mean? It
yep,
just seems like it's this totally separate activity.
yes.
Okay,
So
anything
another
else?
technique I like,
Yeah,
yeah,
go
another
ahead.
technique I like to call, and I call it, well, my husband told me this term, and I was like, oh, that's what you call it. And I just would teach it without this term, but he called it chunk and chew. Okay. So with ADHD, you can only focus on one thing at a time.
Hmm.
ADHD does not allow you to be a multitasker. Okay. Well, we're all
Yes.
of us aren't great multitaskers anyways. We're not doing a good service by multitasking anyways. But ADHD, those neural pathways just don't do well with multitasking. So teaching them to find a chunk of something and chew on it. Okay. So look at your math paper, chunk number one, only chew on number one until you're done chewing number one, chunk number two, and chew number two. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
it helps them just think about that. Like you're just saying, remember to chunk and chew. And they're like, okay, I got it. But also another thing that helps chunk and chew is to get another piece of paper and cover up everything else. Okay.
Mhm.
So their brain is not focused on the overwhelm of everything. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
you take a piece of paper and literally when they're reading, like cover the top and bottom so they can only see the sentence that they're on. And you just move that down, that top paper and that bottom paper, so that they're only seeing the sentence that they're reading and they're not overwhelmed by the rest of it. Or math, cover up all the problems except for the one they're working on. So that helps them chunk and chew without seeing the overwhelm of everything.
So that makes a lot of sense to me because I'm also a piano teacher. So it's what I'm
Yeah.
constantly telling my students when they look at this big piece that's super overwhelming. I always have them take it in chunks when it gets to that point. I'm like, no, just do this line 10 times over until it's really good. And then we can add in another one. And sometimes you do like, just cover up that second page because we can't even think about doing this whole thing.
Yes.
It's just too
It
much.
overwhelms, right?
Yeah.
Like it's the same concept. If you walk in the kitchen and there's just a disaster, we get overwhelmed, right?
Yeah.
But if we chunked and chewed our kitchen away,
Yeah.
right,
And we're
it's
like,
not as
okay,
overwhelming,
just
right?
dishes,
Put
just dishes.
put a sheet over this one.
Yeah, I'm not even gonna look at the floor and the counters. I can't even go there. Oh yeah. Oh, and the kids get like that cleaning their rooms all the time. It's like
Yes.
get in there and I'm like, okay, just clean up the books. Okay, next, just pick up the My Little Ponies or whatever
Yes.
that helps
That
out
is
a ton.
totally my tip for we can transition into homework and chores
Mhm.
and stuff, but that's my tip for chores is don't give more than one instruction at a time.
Mhm.
If you want a result, they're only going to follow one anyways, possibly. But if they get two instructions, they may not follow any of them because now
Yes.
you just overwhelmed
Yes.
that executive functioning brain, right? Like, and now you've just turned on that system and they're not going to follow any of them.
Oh,
If
I
you
know
want a result, you don't, like you said, you chunk and chew the bedroom, but don't tell them all of those things at once,
No,
right?
yeah. You have to do
You
one thing
have
at a
to,
time. Hmm.
yep, find all the ponies and then come talk to me,
Hmm.
right? And
Yes.
then
Oh, I do the same. Oh yeah. This is
yes,
this for my child that I'm having struggles with this.
yeah,
And there's like no multitasking. It's like I can't
no,
say go take out the garbage and then go put the cupcakes in the fridge. Like it
yeah,
has to be totally separate. So
it
that
does,
can totally
yeah,
see that.
yeah.
That's so
And
funny.
it's fine, but you can teach them, like when they get older, I'm just chunking and chewing for you,
Yeah.
right? Like I just
Yeah. Love
you're
that.
gonna get another one, but just do this one, focus on this one, right?
Yeah.
And do that. So um the homework, so I always say, like, so we have a hard time coming home from school and just jumping in and doing homework. One of it is because usually they have not eaten or drank any water in the last like 4 hours, right? And so if you're trying just in general functioning, like I don't function well when I'm hungry or tired, right?
Or when I first walk in the door, I need a breath.
Yeah, exactly. So eat. Have them eat something, just nourish their bodies. Also, it activates their senses, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just as they're eating, you can talk about how things smell. You can talk about how they taste or the textures of things, things like that. With homework, set up a plan to chunk it and chew it, okay? So say we're going to do these 5 problems, and then we're going to take a break and you can go play with your friends. Then we're going to do 5 more problems after dinner. And then we're going to do 5 more problems before you go to bed or something like that. Like really chunk it down and have breaks in between that, because that they need to be able to kind of restore and refresh in that process. So really having those breaks. Have a dedicated space that you do the homework in that is void of all distractions. So it's not the kitchen table where everybody's walking past, the TV's on, things like that. Like it might be in the basement corner where you are present with them. You're not banishing them to a corner somewhere by themselves, but you're going to need to be present with them and teach them how to do this, right? And so it has to be a distraction-free zone that things aren't going to be walking through or turned on, or people aren't going to be coming in and asking questions, because once that happens, concentration's gone. We're going to have to do some senses work. We're going to have to refocus here and do that. Doing homework.
I was just going to say, one of my biggest struggles is when they have computer work, because there's tons of homework that my kids have on the computer. And so I want the computer in the family space because I don't want any trouble with that. Do you just pull everybody else out of the room and just...
so you could find a time when people aren't walking through. You could say, we're doing homework here. This is what we're doing. I need you to go do this, and set a timer. Like you can't come in for 10 minutes, right? Or you can't walk past. We're turning the TV off. I'm not having any alarm. Dinner alarm's not going to go off and I'm running out. So certainly just make that a distraction-free zone.
Because that can be another rabbit hole. I mean, not only just
absolutely
internet safety, but just because it's like they get on there and they're like, oh, let's look at YouTube for a little while in between.
Exactly.
And it's just like, oh my goodness, are you kidding?
Yes. They can get distracted. Computers can be distracting in general. So you might have to sit down with them or be doing, if you're not doing homework with them, you might be having to do regular checks and checking on them as well.
Okay.
Also, standing up while you're doing your homework can be helpful, or sitting on an exercise ball.
Okay.
So movement is really great for focus. So one, because it's using their senses, right?
Okay.
But movement and exercise are great for ADHD. So if you can have them sit on an exercise ball while they're on the computer, or stand up and do their homework, it's really helpful in that way. You can also have like a little basket or something with senses things. I'm not so much set on like you have to have an item to use your senses, because I feel like you can use your senses wherever you are. But like if they have a thing of Play-Doh that they're playing with, like fidget spinners were a big thing, a while ago for kids with ADHD.
We had a house full of fidget spinners.
Yes. Yeah. But you can have something that's a little bit less distracting than a fidget spinner, like some putty or some slime or something like that they can kind of roll around in their hands and mold and shape and things like that.
And not the dollar store slime, because that stuff is a disaster and it gets everywhere.
Right? Yes, we are so throwing those away all the time. Yes. Like, you're going to spend your money on that? Why? Because I'm going to put it in the trash when it gets home.
Oh my gosh, it kills me. No, but I love Silly Putty. That's a great one.
Yeah, because it's moldable, changeable.
Yeah, and it's not
it. Like, you can snap it. Yep, they can snap it. They can bounce it. There's lots of things they can do with that. So, that can be really helpful. Make sure you're taking care of your own emotions during this process, because it can get really tricky and sticky with that too. So, all right, that's homework. Nighttime. We ready for nighttime now?
Okay, I need some nighttime for free. Play it for me. So I want to go to bed earlier, so I need my...
Yes. I was just going to say, these are tools that everybody could use. We all need to be doing these, okay? Yeah. Number one is good sleep hygiene, okay? Good sleep hygiene has routines involved. Okay. So sleep is associated with things that we're doing. Okay. So if we do the same routine every night, it triggers our brain to start thinking, oh, it's nighttime. This is what we're doing. Right. So you can have them just kind of get used to doing that, the same thing over and over again. They read the same book, or they always take a shower, they brush their teeth, they, whatever those association things are, it's the same routine every night. Okay. Another thing with sleep hygiene is making sure that they're not interacting with screens 2 hours before bedtime. There's been studies about the blue light that's given off. They have blue light glasses that you can wear if you have to have screens 2 hours before bedtime. But TVs give off that blue light. It can cause the brain to think it needs to be awake as well. So no screen time 2 hours before you want them to go to bed. Also, another thing is exercise goes hand in hand with ADHD. If they have to be wearing themselves out during the day. So they need to be doing something that's like really intensive, like going for a run or playing basketball, or, something intensive during the day, wears the body out so it can wind down at night with that. Another thing, it's called the cooling phase, body changing the your temperature of your body. So take a warm bath, you get your body temperature up, and you have a really cool room. You always want your bedroom to be cool. And then you go into your cool bedroom. The cooling phase of your body triggers it to want to go to sleep.
Okay. No, so that's why when our air conditioner was out last week, nobody could sleep. The house is 85 degrees, and it was so humid and so miserable. Yes, nobody slept good that night. It was horrible. Yes.
Yep. So you don't want them to go to bed cold, like you're not freezing cold and you go to bed cold. I can't fall asleep if I'm like that.
I can't sleep.
I have to warm myself up. I take a bath every night to warm myself up because I'm always freezing cold. I take a bath and then I go to sleep. And then as soon as you go into your cold bedroom, it's the cooling phase and it puts you right to sleep.
We're just going to have such good sleepers over here. All my kids are just going to be.
You have to take pictures of everybody sleeping and send them to me.
I'll post it in our stories. I'll be that creepy mom with all the sleeping pictures. Oh, these are such good ideas, though.
Another thing, too, is if they wake up at night and they have a hard time getting back to sleep, I like to have a senses bucket next to them. So you can have a good thing to have is like a white noise machine that they can turn on and flip on. So they're listening to the background sounds and the white noise. This can also help them fall asleep. It can be one of those association things too. Like you hear that sound and boom, your body's like, oh, it's sleepy time, right? But also you can have like a bucket of or a basket, it doesn't matter what it is, but like stuffed animals or something. On that stuffed animal, it has sprayed lavender on it so they can smell it, they can snuggle it. There's, you have, what do they call those? Like we can put essential oils in, diffusers that you can put smells in. So you can have a diffuser that has an associated smell with it. And they can fall asleep with that as well every night and kind of have those.
Wave that smell around their nose.
Yeah.
Really sleepy every night.
Exactly. I mean, lavender is said to be like a calming effect and put you to sleep as well, but it's also an association thing too, right? Like you just associate like lavender with sleep and you get put to sleep whenever you smell lavender.
I have lavender all over my house.
Also, if you have kids on medications, so the ADHD medications are stimulants, right? So they're going to wake you up. So if they started medications, they're having a hard time sleeping, you want to work with their medication provider to kind of talk with them about maybe having a shorter acting one that wears off like midnight, afternoon, evening, or having ones that they just take in the morning, and then, you might have to deal with some of the behaviors later at night, but then they're able to sleep, so you kind of have to have the pros and cons of that talk with your medication provider as well.
So do you find that if they're not sleeping well, these symptoms are even more present? Because that's where I feel I feel like we're kind of in a bad spot because I'm like, you're not
Yeah.
sleeping. And I feel like the forgetfulness is just in the non-ability
Yep.
to focus
Yep.
is
Yeah.
like crazy.
Well, we all get that way too. Like if you have depression and you're not sleeping, it's going to increase your depression. If you have anxiety and
Yeah.
you're not sleeping, it's going to increase your anxiety. Or if you don't have depression and anxiety and you're not sleeping, you might feel like you have depression and anxiety
Yeah.
because you're
Oh,
just not
totally.
sleeping. Like sleep affects our mood so much. And so we want to be aware of that, and really sleep needs to be kind of a priority on this list. Like if I was looking at this list and saying I had problems in all three of these areas, the first one I would tackle is sleep.
Okay.
Right? For everything, for everyone in my whole family, right? Like I need to be sleeping well, and so I need to be using these tools, and my kids need to be using these tools. But
I
also,
think that's
like
the
with
hardest thing about being a new mom, right? Is that you're
right,
not sleeping, and so it's like you feel like you can't handle your life because you're just so exhausted.
that's the word. Yeah, exactly. Right, causing more postpartum depression, right? Because we're just not
Yeah.
sleeping well and things like that. So I use the mind body bridging techniques. There's so much more to mind body bridging besides the senses. Like that's not all that it's about. Like there's reasons that our system is waking up and causing this, and there's reasons that it's staying awake, and you have to map those out and find those out. And so I think if you're having a hard time sleeping, learning to map some of those issues out before you go to bed can help put you in the right mindset and start diffusing some of those reasons so they're not constant reasons for you, right? Like you're not on this teeter-totter of using my senses, turning it off, but then it's turning back on because there's certain thoughts that are turning it back on. And then we're on, off, right? Like we want to get off the teeter-totter, right? And
Yeah.
so that's some of the techniques and tools I teach as well, is how to map out those reasons and start diffusing them in your life so that they're not reasons any longer for yourself.
Oh my goodness. I got a lot of homework tonight. I have a lot of things to do. I think I'm gonna
I know,
make my
that's a
family
whole
listen
bunch.
to this podcast over and over again. Okay. We're gonna do this, guys. We're gonna get our mind and body bridged. We're gonna we're gonna be focused. We're gonna be so smart in school. It's gonna be
Yeah.
great. The house will be
Oh,
clean. This is just gonna help
yes.
all these areas.
So chunk and chew this information too. Like there's a lot of good information there, but you can't chew it all, right? Like
Exactly.
you have to
Yeah,
chunk
I'm gonna
one
overwhelm
thing.
them all at the first second.
Yes. Chunk one thing, work on it till it becomes a habit, come back and listen to it again, or write down your top 10 and just start at one. Do it until it becomes habit, and then move on to number two. You cannot tackle all of these areas, and you cannot do all of these things in one area to try and tackle that either. Like
Exactly.
just work on one thing, chunk and chew that until it becomes a habit. So if you try to throw everything at once, you might do well for a week, and then it's all going to go by the wayside and you're not going to do any of it.
Yeah.
So you have to really just implement slowly. Slow change is sustainable. Big changes are not sustainable and do not last.
So would you say start with sleep as your number one on these three
If
things?
that's one of the issues that's on there, I would recommend sleep first.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then maybe our little senses exercises. Do you think that would probably
Yes.
be up there too?
Definitely. That's in all three of those areas. So I would definitely get the free printable where we talk about the senses. Like thinking about senses is great, but teaching your kids how to use their senses is going to be a little bit more difficult. So that little plan, you've seen it. It's kind of kid friendly, right? It's
Yeah,
got some
I like
cartoons
it. It's
on it.
very like it just spells things out, has your
Yep.
little numbers where you can list things. It even has little pictures for them to remember. I like that it has visual, but it's also got something they can
Yep.
list.
So I use this plan for kids who can't even read. They can draw a picture next to number one and a picture next to number two, because it has a picture of the eyeball, right? And they can
Yeah.
draw a picture of all the things they can see, and do that. So you can do this with a 2 or a 3-year-old. Like it does not have to be just for kids who can read or write. So you can, I think printing the plan is going to be key in really teaching them. It's going to walk you through how to teach them and how to have this conversation with them.
This is so great. I can't wait. I think I'm going to teach this to my son that's struggling, and then I'm going to have him teach everybody else on a family night or something.
Yes, that's
Right?
awesome. That's the best way to learn it, is to teach it.
Don't they
Yes,
say when you teach, you learn it better? So I've got to learn it really good
exactly.
so I can teach it, and then he can teach it, and then we're all just
Yeah,
be.
absolutely. So start applying the skills yourself, right? You can share that experience with him and say, when I was making the dough and I was doing this, this is what I experienced. It was really helpful. And absolutely.
Oh, Niki,
Awesome.
you're so awesome. Is there anything else that I missed? Is there anything else that you wanted to add in
I
there?
think I think that's it. I think I have all those services we kind of talked about in the last podcast. So if you want individual help, I have individual sessions. I have group consultation sessions, which are great for like parenting questions. Like if you're just like, well, we have this area that's really struggle for me. What can we do? And I can just quickly answer that question for you. It's a super affordable way to have access to me and talk through that with me. You know, $27 a month, you get all your questions answered, right? Less than a copay. And you have access to all the videos I've recorded and can get answers to questions you didn't even know you had.
That's so awesome. Okay, so let's tell
them and then the digital courses
one more time. Yeah, let's tell, because I think maybe we didn't tell the website yet. So let's tell them your website really quick.
So my website is MBB Niki, so Mind Body Bridging. That's kind of what it stands for. Is Niki is NIKI.com. So MBBNiki.com is the website where you can find all those services. I'll have a digital course out where you can learn these skills just on your own time with little 10-minute video snippets so that you can kind of understand the skills yourself or have your kids watch them. And then with the digital course, you also have access to 5 months free of the group consultation. So if both of those sound great to you, I would do the course because you get 5 months free by purchasing the digital course. And then you also can find me on social media at the same handle, MBB Niki. Follow along there. I offer free tips and tricks, and you know, it's not just about me promoting my services. I want to be a place where people can get free advice and help as well on there, and engaging in my posts, I can offer that help as well. So good. Yay!
And if you guys missed our last podcast where we talked about personal revelation and how you go through all of that, you've got to listen to that. So we'll link to all of these wonderful things in the show notes. I am
awesome.
So great.
Thank you so much.
I had such a blast. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
What did I tell you? Niki is just absolutely fantastic, isn't she? She is so knowledgeable. I've learned so much from her, so I have very, very detailed show notes. If you have been listening while you haven't had a pen handy and you want all this information, I tried really hard to get as much of the details that she talked about into the show notes with links and everything else so that you can go there and reference back, or of course you can re-listen to this episode as many times as you need to. Don't forget to go visit us on social media and get more details about how Niki is going to be on our social media doing our live event with us this week, and get any questions that you have for her. Maybe now that you've listened to this podcast, you have more things rolling around in your head of different things that you might want to ask her. So get those questions ready, send them over to us, and if you've been enjoying this podcast, or if you know someone that would really be benefited by this, please share it with them. And if you're listening through Apple Podcasts, please give us a rate, review, and subscribe, of course. So have a fabulous week. Can't wait to talk to you soon.